Welcome to today's webinar on structural data collection, mapping, core logging, and more. We've got our panel of experts here today who have been very gracious with their time. They've come here to answer your questions and have a really great discussion. So just a little bit of background information before we get started. So this webinar is brought to you by the Geotechnical Center of Excellence. We are at the University of Arizona. We're part of the School of Mining and Mineral Resources. We are an industry-funded group, and we're member-led. We pride ourselves on being a very interdisciplinary center, and we conduct collaborative geotechnical research and education. We also strive to bridge gaps within and between academia, industry, and fields of study. This webinar is part of that. As I mentioned, the GCE is a member-funded group. So I want to give a big shout out to all of our member companies shown here, quite a who's who in the industry. If you're watching today and you would like to become a member, you can contact us a couple different ways. We're on LinkedIn, Geotechnical Center of Excellence, or you can send us an email at gce@arizona.edu. And I think we'll probably put some of our contact information in the chat as well. So this webinar is based on our professional development course, Structural Geology for Geotechnical Professionals. This is a 12-week asynchronous online course. You can see it started on August 6th. So it's been running for a while, but we run these annually. So you'll have another chance to take it next year. These are live and online. So it's all pre-recorded videos. They're released every 2 weeks, and there's a total of about 26 hours of pre-recorded content, which is done by our experts, some of which are here today. So if you'd like to learn more about this course, you can scan the QR code. We have a total of 4 courses that we offer, so you can check those out at our website. I think some of my colleagues will drop that in the chat as well. So please go ahead and check out all that. We have also got an upcoming course, Fundamentals of Open Pit Slope Design, which I believe will be released pretty soon. I don't remember exactly, October
22nd.
There we go. Thank you, Jill. This course was underwritten by the Large Open Pit Project, so a huge shout out to them. They really helped us out getting this course off the ground. And as always, a big thank you to our panelists here today, our course advisors, and all of our collaborators. Putting on these courses is a huge effort, and we could not do it without them. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you're tuned in today, you are muted by default and your video is off, so don't worry about any of that. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom control panel. You'll see that there's a chat function and a Q&A function. They look similar. We encourage you to use both. The chat is just for chatting. If you have a specific question you'd like to ask the panelists, please use the Q&A function. It helps us keep things organized and make sure that your question doesn't get lost in the queue. You can submit those anonymously if you'd like. And you can also vote for questions that you see other people pose with a little thumbs up so we can sort of high grade questions that a lot of people are interested in. This is also a recorded webinar. We'll post this to the Structure course site as well as our YouTube page, which I believe will be in the chat shortly as well. And lastly, just a little disclaimer, this webinar is really intended for educational purposes only. It's not intended to be any substitute for professional advice. If you're having issues with your site, we encourage you to seek professional guidance on that. Okay, let's get into a couple introductions, starting with your hosts. I'll be your moderator today. My name is James McNabb. I'm a Senior Research and Development Engineer here at the Geotechnical Center of Excellence, and I'm joined today by my co-hosts also at the GCE, starting with Julia Potter. She is the Director of the GCE. Good morning, Julia.
Good morning, James. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Next, we have Jillian Noonan. She is a Senior Research and Development Engineer as well at the GCE. Hello, Jillian.
Hi, James. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We're looking forward to your questions today.
And we have Christian Ortman. He's a computing science researcher at the GCE. Good morning, Christian.
Good morning, James. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. It should be a good webinar.
Okay, let's introduce our expert panel now. First up, we have Amanda Hughes. She is an assistant professor of practice in the Department of Geosciences here at the University of Arizona. Hello, Amanda.
Morning, James. Good to be here.
Next, we have Wayne Barnett. He's a principal structural geologist with SRK Consulting. Good morning, Wayne.
Good morning, everybody, or whatever time it is there.
Right, good evening. Yeah. Next, we have Jeff Owen. I am not sure if Jeff is here this morning, but I'll introduce him in case he joins later. He's a manager of structural geology and mining operations and advanced project exploration with Tech Resources Limited. And we'll see if he joins later. We hope he does. Next, we have Graham Banks. He's a senior principal geoscientist with Root to Reserves and Geothermal Energy Advisors. Hello, Graham. Thanks for joining.
Hi, everybody. Looking forward to the conversations.
Next, we have Jason Hallowell. He's a geomechanical engineer with Colin Nicholas Incorporated here in Tucson. Hello, Jason.
Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Next, we have Blair Robbie. He's a principal consultant with SRK Consulting in Canada. Hello, Blair.
Morning, James. Good to be here.
And lastly, we've got Tom Hamilton. He's a senior geologist of geotechnical with Elk Valley Resources. Hello, Tom. Thanks for being here. Might be muted there, Tom. That's okay. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. We'll start with a kind of a kickoff discussion. This is a really broad question just to get the ball rolling. So kind of for the entire panel, maybe I'll kick it off to somebody to get us rolling, but structural data is the foundation of many critical decisions in our industry. In your opinion, what is the most important aspect of structural data collection in mining? I think I will, just to get it started, I'll start with Wayne because he's the first person I see on my screen.
Thank you. This is actually one of my favorite questions.
Oh, perfect.
I have this mantra which I use, PPC, pattern, properties, and continuity. Those are key aspects that you need to look at, obviously, when you're mapping in a pit and you're trying to understand what structures could impact the pit stability. To me, I would say arguably the pattern's the most important. Because that's what ultimately what controls the orientation of your wedges or your toppling failure or what it is. It's those patterns that really drive everything. Yes, the properties can be important because some of them could be more cohesive and some could be much less cohesive. And continuity can be important too because of segmentation. So they may, the structures may not connect up and provide because of segmentation. So that's in brief my view on this. So pattern is, in my opinion, the most important in understanding the structures for open pit stability. Yep.
Great. Thanks for getting us started on that, Wayne. Anybody else like to chime in? Graham?
I like that you've got the word decision in the question. So it's all about decision making ultimately. Somebody, possibly not the person that's making the observation, has to make the decision. And so my own perspective is that we have to make sure that the information that is collected is reliable, because it might be somebody else, maybe a long time in the future, who's actually going to make the decision about it, maybe even an accountant who doesn't have the geoscience background. So, excuse me, the information that's collected has to be reliable. That means it has to be consistent, reproducible, and repeatable. And I always make sure that that's written down very clearly. Someone else who's going to look at your piece of paper has to make $1 million decision.
Yeah, very good. Big decisions. Anybody else?
I'd also say that one of the big things for us is collecting data that's fit for purpose. That for every mapping project, there's usually a reason to do it, and there's an infinity of things to measure usually in any project. So understanding what the purpose of the data is ultimately going to be for will help refine what you're actually going to spend your time on. because time is always limited as well. So just knowing what the point is.
That's a great point, Blair. Time is limited. All right. Any other thoughts on this, Amanda?
Yeah, I would just add those are all really good, and to build on those, to retain while mapping, to build on Wayne's points, the characteristics of them. So not just a fault, but the characteristics of the types of fault, because sometimes it can be tempting when you're out there to have already decided that these are the same thing and just call them something, that you then lose the richness of the observations that you can then go back and interrogate alternative interpretations later on. And along the same lines, the retaining the spatial component of the distribution of the data, instead of just lumping it all together and putting all your fractures on one stereo net that looks like spaghetti. Retaining how that varied spatially will help you after the fact to go make better sense of things like spatial variability in your data that otherwise can get lost if things get grouped together.
Very good. It sounds like a lot of these are born out of painful mistakes. I know I've made a lot. Okay. Anybody else like to chime in on this? If not, we can get into our pre-submitted questions. Okay, let's go for it. We've got a couple of questions from Gustavo here. We'll start with this one here. How can uncertainty or limited structural data be addressed when building geological models in areas with thick surface cover or in complex zones? This sounds like could be a geophysical problem. So maybe I'll start with Graham.
Yep. I would start with uncertainty. Excuse me, the state of mind that is, you don't know what this looks like. You don't have enough information. You're unsure. Excuse me. And therefore, you have to start by saying, what's your range of uncertainty? The best way of doing that is to have a main working hypothesis and then two alternative hypotheses. And that's always the way that I would start. Always be, if geophysics or subsurface information is going to be collected, it is to test a hypothesis. It isn't to find a hypothesis. So always start with the multiple working hypotheses. The subsurface is data limited by definition. You have to make definitions based on not knowing very much. 1,000 drill holes in several square cubic kilometers is only 1/1,000,000% of the rock mass sampled. And so we have to start with your uncertainty. And that's characterized by your biases. Excuse me. So your biases first, your uncertainties, your uncertainty range, three working hypotheses, then justify collecting which data is going to have the biggest impact on you being able to get rid of two of those hypotheses. That's the way I would do it. Or always do it.
Great, very concise. Thank you. I might ask Blair. I'm curious your thoughts on this. If I'm correct, it sounds like this is a lot of what you do, dealing with very limited data.
It's sometimes difficult because the software is constrained in some ways. You sort of end with a surface when you're building surfaces. There's little way to directly show the uncertainty associated with that. So trying to annotate that with metadata that allows a description around what is limiting the data, showing what data is informing that, the actual data points that might inform it, and giving some sort of qualitative assessment about how strong, how confident you are in both the geometry and the presence of that into areas that have less data. It's always a challenge though, how to communicate that, because once it gets out of your hands, sometimes these models just, they take on a life of their own, and you have to be cognizant of how that is going to progress through the mining cycle and make best efforts to keep the information associated with it along with, as it gets inherited further and further away from the originator of the data. It's a big challenge. Wayne is actually done quite a bit of work around uncertainty in models as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point.
I know others need to chime in. You can make a brief comment.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the most important things here is the conceptual model, right? And again, we go back to patterns. If you're looking, if you've got very little data, look at the regional data, look at the evidence in the that you see on surface, right? You may not have that information at depth, but the patterns again that you see in the environment near your area of interest is going to be able to give you guidance, at least what the conceptual model, structural model is, and that will guide interpretations. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, great points. Okay, we're done with this question. Thank you, Gustavo. Much appreciated. Let's see, we've got quite a few live questions coming in. This is a hot topic. I'll jump to this one from Henry. Can you talk about AI, artificial intelligence, applied to structural data collection, mapping, and core logging? I think there's a lot going on in this space. And we actually have a module at the end of the structure course that covers this. Of course, it's changing every day, so might have to do some updates. Anybody like to chime in on this? It's a big one. Tom, I can see you're talking, but I think you might be muted there.
Yeah, Tom, I sent you a personal chat just on some troubleshooting for your audio, if you look in the chat. But yeah, you're not muted, so you might need to just check your microphone output.
Thank you, Jillian. All right. Well, we don't have any thoughts on this. That's fine. It's a very complex topic, and it's kind of an emerging one. That's why we added this section at the end of the structure course, because there's a lot of ongoing research right now, and it's very confusing, especially if you don't know a whole lot about AI like myself. Thanks for the question, Henry.
Yeah. So one thing I would say, just in
Yeah,
some
thank you, Blair.
that we do within our office, and I'm come from a mapping background, so it's not really applied to mapping though. But we're doing a lot of pattern recognition on core logging. With it, other people in our group who are far better at this than me. So it's becoming a way to try and be more systematic and uniform in the assessment of things like fracture density, or even mapping veins, for instance, or vein density. And it's really just, again, it's like a pattern. What some of the things we're doing is around pattern recognition. So using high quality core photographs to automate the process of identifying those features and doing it. So it's an interesting new avenue. I haven't done or thought too much about it as it applies to mapping though. So it is an interesting question, something I have to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, I don't know, the latest conference in Bello this year, Jeff Owen was showing what you could do with drill core logging, and I think also the application of hyperspectral data on the core, which helps with mapping. So yeah, very exciting area, but also not my specialty. Thanks.
Yeah, likely this will be covered in, if not the next webinar, the following one, where we'll be discussing these topics specifically. So, but I agree that it seems like specifically using AI on core has kind of been where a lot of the research is currently. So, all right. Well, thank you for the question, Henry. Please tune into a future webinar, and we'll be discussing that topic specifically. All right. Let's go to a question from Alpha. What are the most important and common tools used in the field for collecting accurate geotechnical data? So let's see. Important. Maybe I'll kick this off to Jason. You do a lot of collecting geotechnical data in the field.
Sure. I think one of the most important things is a Brunton compass. You're going to be measuring structures, and the other, I think, most important thing is just your eyes. A lot of times you're not going to be able to get up close to the structures. You're not going to be able to get in there with your rock pick and see how soft the joint filling is. Although, those are obviously useful tools as well. The advent of drones and point cloud data has been also very useful. We do a lot of data collection to areas of pits that we can't access or stopes underground we can't access using LiDAR scanners or photogrammetry. And if you're underground, good lighting, not only having bright lights, but also having something with a high color rendering index and a decent tint. You don't want, super cold, high Kelvin light.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, good, very good points. Tom, if your microphone is working, I know you do a lot with point cloud mapping. Any additions to this? Looks like your microphone's still not working, unfortunately. Well, oh, Blair?
Yeah, no, the other thing that's commonly, that's come on very strongly for using in the field is, use of smartphones or tablets that have built-in compasses and gyrometers, accelerometers to be able to use as structural compasses in the field. So like there's apps like Clino, for instance, that runs on iPhones and Android phones for rapid data collection of structural surfaces. My personal experience with them is that they're great if you're going to be collecting a large amount of data and you're not too worried about small errors. But I would always, for a major structural feature, I would always go back to my run just to be sure. But it's certainly wide use to rapidly collect large data sets if you're trying to collect a population of joints, for instance, and you're doing it in the field, measuring on surfaces, can really speed things up.
Yeah, great point.
Comment there as
Yeah,
well.
please.
Well, so we're talking about geotechnical data, right? So, obviously all the structural data you get is a key component of input for geotechnical data too. But you're also then talking about fractures, frequencies, fracture continuities. So being able to obtain that data. Typically, we used to do that through window mapping. Nowadays, we can also do that using LiDAR imagery. And I know there's different challenges depending on making sure of the accuracy, depending on the method you're using. But I think that's becoming more common now to actually be able to scan the pit with the drone. And we've done this already, projects like that where you scan the pit with a drone and you can then, as long as the resolution is high enough of the area that you're interested in, you can then measure the orientations and sometimes the orientations depending on the data, but definitely the continuity of those structures or the fractures themselves. So that it can help give a good idea or help define domains, geotechnical domains in pits. In fact, that's usually quite a successful approach. What else? Geotechnical. So yeah, and the properties, of course, in the field, you need to sometimes some of these fractures can have alteration along them, so you'd want to know what that is. You want to look at roughness and again continuity. Can't think of anything else right now.
Great, thank you, Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Graham.
Very quickly, make sure you know what all the structures are and how to differentiate between them. So maybe take a pictorial glossary with you. One person's fault is someone else's joint, is someone else's fracture. Ask 3 geologists and get 4 opinions. It's terrible. So make sure that you've got the standard company glossary with you, ideally with photographs, so you all know this is a joint and it's not a fault, and this is why. That's so important. Going back to that reliability, it needs to be less subjective and more objective.
Very good point. And everybody should go back and watch Amanda's presentations on faults and joints. Getting back to the Brunton compass, Jason, I know you've had issues with magnetic interference. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you overcame it?
Yeah, so obviously, if you're in an area where you've got magnetic rocks, magnetite, especially underground, or even if you're underground in a non-magnetic zone, but you're next to a large piece of equipment, it can really throw your readings off. So some of the things we've done are actually mapping using just an angle finder instead of the Brunton. Using the Brunton for the dips, but an angle finder for the strikes, and referencing that to a known survey line inside the mine. And then the other thing we've done is also mapping using point clouds in those areas.
Yeah, very good. Especially because you might not realize that your measurements are off till you're back in the office, and you might not even know that. So good lesson. Okay, let's move on to, we've got another question from Gustavo. This is something I think we've all dealt with. What are the main challenges when integrating structural data from different sources, like mapping, logging, geophysics, to generate robust geological models? This is a big problem. Very good question, Gustavo. Anybody would like to get us started on this? It's a big topic.
I think one thing is to recognize that there are potential errors associated with all of those data sources, in terms of just spatial errors, potential spatial errors, and interpretive errors. So it almost necessitates the allowance of a certain amount of leeway in any structure that you model, especially going between mapping and logging. Logging, you're dependent on knowing where the drill hole is, and there's often error associated with that. Probably less so locational error in mapping a point feature, but then there's interpretation error that comes into it. So just recognizing that leeway is got to be allowed.
Very good. Thank you, Blair. Graham?
Yeah, just building on exactly what Blair said there. Error, also uncertainty, human biases, human subjectivity. They're the biggest issues in terms of getting the right model or the right hypothesis. We don't know how the geophysics was processed or why it was acquired in such a configuration, never mind why it was interpreted that way, especially if it's out of the literature, it was 10 years ago, and when you can't phone those people to ask them. And so it's the human subjectivity. It's always the biggest issue. So you always have to have a range of uncertainty. The industry is always trying to be very precise in a very small volume rather than just trying to be generally right on a larger volume. And so just be mindful that all the humans have had all their biases, different professors, different books, different amounts of time and budget to collect that information. And just try and be generally right rather than precisely wrong.
Very good point, Graham. Okay, anybody else want to jump in on this one? It's a great question, Gustavo. Something we definitely all deal with. Okay.
It looks like we've got Tom back. I just want to see if we've got Tom's audio now.
I think it's working now.
There you are. Perfect.
Hey.
Welcome. Glad we figured it out.
Well, in that case, I'm going to jump to a question that is in Tom's wheelhouse. If we're done with Gustavo's question, thank you for the question. This one is a pre-submitted question for the panel. Structure mapping from drone images and point clouds is the new norm for us. Is there still a case to be made for boots on ground mapping? I believe there is, but the safety benefits of remote over field mapping are hard to argue against to management. Tom, I think this is probably something you deal with a lot, kind of balancing the boots on ground and the remote mapping.
Yeah, there's definitely still a space for field mapping if you could get away with it. I don't do as much as that as I'd like in the open mine pits, but where you can still get to it at road cuts or places where you can do it safely, it's great. You're still missing. There's data that you just can't get from photogrammetry, like roughness, infill, weathering, different kinematic indicators. Also, just the resolution or angle that you get from drone. Sometimes there are things that are biased against that. So it's always nice if you could actually get up to the face and do your mapping yourself. But photogrammetry is pretty good, especially if you get some backup camera shots to kind of artificially get close to the wall, anyways.
Yeah, certainly. It seems like people are trending towards a lot of remote mapping with field verification.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Great. Anybody else would like to chime in on this one?
Comment again here briefly. Really to
Yes.
support the previous response there from Tom. What you're really, again, always trying to do is try and build an overall conceptual model, an understanding of the system. And fundamental to that is getting the kinematic data. So you want to know how that rock was deformed to get into its current state. And that obviously controls the orientation of the fault systems that are going to be important. So being able to get up close and measure very hard to see slicken lines, stretching lineations are just, it's just fundamental to what we do. And therefore you can't ignore that in the field mapping component. Of course, there are significant challenges now with restrictions getting close to rock face, but there's ways to get around it. You apply, if you can, there are ways to apply safety measures to make sure you can get close enough. Thanks.
Thank you. Very good. Okay. I think we've made the case. There is a case for boots on ground mapping, always, if you can do it safely. We have quite a few really good live questions coming in, so having trouble deciding which one, but I'm going to just jump to this one right here from Nicholas. How do you deal with different structural data quality/confidence, like old logs, maps, different companies' logs, data, etc.? I think this is something that applies to many, many different assets. Graham, I see you raised your hand.
First thing you need to do is a value of information exercise. And if it's not going to have a material impact on the outcome, then don't use it. There's so much subjectivity, whether it's reliable, so much ambiguity. If it's going to reduce your ambiguity, use it. If it's going to increase your I don't knows, then don't use it. It's as simple as that. And that helps you to focus your time on what's going to have a material impact on the model or the project or the client, rather than so many people spend so much time on stuff that doesn't have an impact on the model, doesn't change anything. So value of information and exercising a decision tree very quickly on what to use and what not to use. I have experience of going to data rooms where I've got maybe 1 or 2 days to decide whether to buy an opportunity or even a company. And so how do you do that in 12 working hours? Just a value of information exercise.
Very good point. As scientists, it can be tough to put data aside.
Yeah, don't get stuck on the thing that you like or are interested in. It's about what's going to add a material positive value to the project, whether it's your favorite thing or not.
Certainly. Amanda, I know you've had similar experiences in these data rooms, likely. Do you have any additions?
No, that's a really good point, Graham. Like, if it's not going to matter, then don't use it at all. I would say at least go through the exercise. You can set up a quality rubric, and then if you're posting data to sections, like not, in that more of a short-term way, but if you're building your own structural model, assign quality factors and weight them accordingly, or color code them when you're posting them to your section, so you know which data you have less necessity to fit when you're building your model, but for sure, yeah.
A bit more than that, it's you're doing an opportunity cost exercise very, very quickly. When I'm looking at this for 2 hours, sort of trying to work out how it was configured, that's 2 hours I didn't spend on something else that might have had more meaning or more importance. So the opportunity cost exercise as well as the value information.
Yeah, good point.
Very good points. Jason, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I think these are great points, and I also think it highlights the need to document what you're doing and how you're doing it so that the people that come behind you 10, 20, 50 years later know what on earth this data means and how it was used and how it was collected.
Excellent point.
One more comment.
Yes, please.
So just taking a more practical in the fields point take on your question. One of the things that always with that slicken line type measurements or slicken sides, there's often lack of certainty with some of those measurements. And what we normally do is we apply a number 1, 2, or 3, where 1 is highest quality, very likely to be a good piece of data evidence, and 3 is low quality. And applying, and then you can make more appropriate decisions at a later stage when you're trying to work out your overall kinematics. Yeah.
Great point. All right. Really good question, Nicholas. And like I said, we've got a ton of excellent live questions. Let's jump to this one from Katerina. What are your recommendations for ensuring consistency in structural data collection, especially in a team with various backgrounds and areas of expertise? This is something a lot of people deal with. A lot of us are geotechnical engineers, engineering geologists. So I think we've got probably a lot of opinions on this. Maybe I'll kick it off to Jason because I know you deal with this a lot. And Graham, I see you unmuted, so.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that we've implemented, we've done a lot of QA/QC implementations, but one of the biggest thing is making sure that everybody's communicating frequently. If we have a big data collection project, everybody is talking things through, and if they are on the fence about whether something should be this or that, they talk it through with their teammates. And we have that. We make sure that we also have very senior people working with some of the newer people frequently and ongoing, not just once or twice as a training session, but doing refreshers all the time. And then just setting up the program in such a way that everything is very clear, the expectations are clear, the definitions are clear. That helps a lot too.
Very good. Thank you. Graham.
Yeah, just following on from the word definitions. Each human has got a different perspective, a different opinion, a different history, a different bias. They can't all be bringing their different biases to the table. This is a fault. It's just a fault. We all have to agree it's a fault. I've worked in the past with structural geologists where someone said, don't agree with you, don't agree with that, I think this, I think that. You can't have any of that. So you just come in with a glossary. This is the company's glossary and pictorial atlas for what these features are, what we do with them, how we analyze them. This is our framework. This is our process. This is our company's way of doing things. The company way, not the individual's way. And I found that's really helped working with companies in the past. Everyone has to be reading from the same page. Simple as that. So if we're all going in with our different opinions into a meeting, different perspectives, it's good to have a variety of perspectives, but we all have to agree that this is the company way of assigning a fault, a fracture, a network, building a model.
Excellent.
Yeah. And to
Yeah,
Graham's previous point, to be able to allow this, things like a core library or a photograph library of all the variation within what you're going to call a specific feature is really critical to have, so that people have visual representations that they can refer back to that are good. And I completely agree. Consistency, it doesn't it ultimately doesn't matter if what you say that particular feature is, as long as everybody says it over and over again, right? You can then take the whole group and reclassify it later, but as long as everybody's calling the same thing at the time, that's critical.
Great points.
Consistent means we all do it the same way by definition. So here's our guidebook of how the company does it the same way, your consistency book. And I work
Very
with
good.
assurance and performance tracking. That's why we want to be consistent. It's because somebody's going to look back in 3 years' time and say, why was that decision made? Why was it interpreted that way? And so you all need to be able to say it's because of this, regardless of who's on vacation or who's in the room. The answer will always be the same. The client doesn't want to know that there's different opinions within the interpretation team. It's the interpretation team's single opinion. Oh, sorry, interpretation.
Very good points. Great question, Katarina. Okay. If we're done with that one, let's move on. We've got kind of a more technical question here from Van. How important is the laminated structure of metamorphic rock regarding rock slope stability? What parameters do we need to take into account for this kind of structure during field mapping? Good question, Van. Maybe I will, we haven't heard from Amanda in a little while. This is kind of in your wheelhouse.
Well, a little bit in that we were just at a mine together not that long ago that has a metamorphic fabric that's a key geotechnical risk. So,
Indeed.
Yeah, so you would want to be mapping that foliation structure in the same way that you would be mapping joint orientations, right? So that you know the effect of that on the slope stability for sure. Mm-hmm. You
Great.
should talk about it. You know more than I do at that.
Yeah. Sorry. I mean, foliations, they're often folded and they change. They can change dramatically over short distances. You need to look at continuity. So the patterns and as Wayne was talking, and you can elaborate on this, Wayne. I believe it's the 3 Ps. Look at the pattern and also it's the persistence and so on, and how they're broken up by later deformation as well, bolts and joints.
So when we go to make the observation, we have our structural glossary and we have our metamorphic glossary. Is
That's
it a
right.
thing, or is it a phyllite texture? And that they're subtly different, but they're important. So absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, I don't see where I can put a hand up here, but yeah, it is also one of our favorite topics, these foliation systems and how important they are. I think we first started building there were 2 companies inclusive of SOK, and that's fine. Who did it first? I'm not going to argue about it, but we're building the foliation models for the open pits, important thing is it's become a very, very important key input into a lot of pits, just to be able to manage potential instability areas. Nowadays, the geotechnical engineers insist on getting that information in their models. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, very good. All right. Let's move on. We've got a ton of questions coming in. Really appreciate it. Let's go to this one from Roan. When interpreting core, how can you differentiate between poor drilling conditions and when a geologic structure has been intersected? This is a great question, something that I've dealt with frequently. Maybe I'll start this off with Jason. I know you've experienced this quite a bit.
Yeah, it can be very difficult. I think one of the things you can look for is just the quality of the drilling overall can help you determine. So if you see a lot of areas where you've got core spinning or other indications of poor drilling, then I think it's going to make you question more so when you come into that zone, whether that's poor drilling practices or, an actual structure. In some cases, you're going to be looking at the filling, but oftentimes if it's poor drilling quality, the filling can all get washed out. I think it's important to spend some time on the drill rigs and also understand the skill level of the different drillers and the different crews. I've had cases where if we have something happen when the day shift crew is drilling, then we're pretty sure it's a geological structure because they do a great job. Whereas if it's night shift, who knows? Yeah, just looking for spun core is definitely a big one. And also looking at how the piece is made up, adjacent to the area. If they're really ground apart and they don't mate up well, then that might be poor drilling. Whereas if just adjacent to it, everything mates up perfectly, then that might indicate it's more a structural issue.
Very good points. You've spent a lot of time with core. All right. Anybody else? Really good question, Roan. Okay, let's move on to this one. I think this is a Tom question here. Is there any open source software for photogrammetry and mapping? And this is from Abdullah.
Open source. I think Pix4D is either open source or relatively cheap. I think that's one of the ones that gets used a fair bit. I think people have used Cloud Compare for it. Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone else has any software that they've used, but I've mostly used Atom Tech and Leapfrog, which aren't open source. But yeah, I think Pix4D has been used in the past. But
yeah, I've got some experience with this.
Anyways.
Yeah, Pix4D, it's not open source. There's different like most softwares, there's different levels of licenses you can get. You can run models for free, you just can't do anything with them in Pix4D, and I think a lot of them are similar. I've had limited success with open source photogrammetry software myself. It can be pretty tricky. Sounds like Amanda, you've had issues as well, especially when you compare it to something like Pix4D or Atom Tech or all that. But certainly for mapping point clouds, Cloud Compare is a great open source tool. Very, very good. I actually prefer it to a lot of others, and it's got a lot of hidden tools as well. Tools created by other people that have been integrated into it. So very, very useful. But again, the photogrammetry is a little trickier. Jason, looks like you're muted, and it looks like Wayne, you've got something.
Very quickly.
Yep.
I'm gonna take a chance here. There's a new software called HiveMap, specifically designed for this. Take a look at it. Thanks.
Thanks, Wayne. Jason, did you have some comments?
Yeah, I was just going to say that every open source free photogrammetry software program we've looked at is severely limited. Most of them have a very hard limit on either the number of pictures you can use or the quality of the photos or the data size. And you really don't get much useful out of those programs. But yeah, I am also a big fan of Cloud Compare, which is open source for doing the mapping from point clouds.
Very good. Yes, Amanda.
Yeah, I would just add real quick on just the mapping side. Rick Almendinger has made a really nice tool called GMDE, which can pull in LiDAR data and you can map, and it'll do 3-point problems and project your surfaces through to give you places to map, to check your interpretations, and you can drape maps and stuff. So that's a really nice tool as well as his other things like, StereoNet that I'm sure people use all the time. But
yeah, excellent. Very good. Okay, thanks for the question, Abdullah. Okay, let's move on. We got about 10 minutes left. Here's another live question from Carl Dania. In a slope optimization study focused on increasing the inner ramp angle in an open pit, what type of structural analysis would you recommend to enhance understanding of defect properties? And I would actually maybe add to this what kind of structural data, since this is about structural data, but I think it's a question that a lot of people face. So thanks for the question, Carol Dania. And I think we have a lot of expertise in the room with this too. How about Wayne?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. So what in a slope optimization study focused on increasing the inter-ramp angle in an open pit, what type of structural analysis, and I'll add what type of data would you recommend to enhance understanding of defect properties?
I'm going to pass on that. um,
Maybe
I'll try to prepare that one.
Yeah, Tom.
Uh, it, it's really going to depend, but geotechnical specific logging for one thing would be helpful. Televiewer would be another good data sets to help you understand the defect properties. Yeah, depending on the what you're talking about defect, like cell mapping, if you're talking about like finer scale joints, it really depends what your problem is.
It's a big
I
question.
guess.
That's why there's entire companies devoted to this specific question.
I think, in my opinion, the first thing that I would do is determine the most likely failure mechanism. What's controlling your angles? Is it bench scale? Is it large scale? Is it faulting? Is it wedges? Is it, some listric fabric? And that will help guide what type of analysis and what type of data you're going to collect to better understand it.
Just one more thing on top of all of that as well. Just the word defect, again, it means different things to different people. Make a list of what type of defect is the one that's either of most interest or is going to have the biggest material impact.
Yeah, good point. And I suppose the question
The word
specifically
defect,
is
a bit like thing. It's like, what kind of thing? So, yeah,
sure. Yeah.
clarify your defects or defect types.
Mhm. All right, great. Thanks for the question, Carol Dania. We've got a kind of a geophysics one here for Graham, also from Carol Dania. Which geophysical survey method would you recommend for detecting fractures and joints in saturated ground? Is the optical televiewer a suitable option?
They're not easy questions, are they? But these are good. I'm going to start with depends on your budget, depends on whether you're going to do ground or air or subsurface. So you want to clarify that first of all. I mean, it's easy to say resistivity or ground penetrating radar, but again, it just depends on your budget, depends on your rock volume, depth of penetration. I'd recommend that the question is, excuse me, any kind of question like this is always refined to start with the time and dollar budget, and then and ask a question from there. Yeah, to be honest with you, I could spend 10 minutes talking about it, but optical televiewer, such. Yeah, it depends on what the purpose is, what the volume is, and whether it's subsurface or surface, and time you have. So always try and refine that question. Again, it's quite ambiguous, which means you're going to get a whole range of uncertainties and different opinions. So maybe really narrow down that ambiguity straight away.
Like most things, it depends.
Yeah,
Especially in our field.
I think if televiewer is an option and the ground is saturated, I think that you would have better luck using an acoustic televiewer rather than an optical. If it's saturated, you're going to have water in the hole, and rarely is the water clean. And even if it is clean, you're going to get a better, cleaner image with more information out of acoustic than you are optical.
And if the ground is frozen or does freeze, then that's another issue again. So in terms of tool choice.
Yeah, good point. All right. I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. This one is a pretty straightforward question, but I think it's one that many people have. This is from Finch. In core logging, what's the importance of alpha and beta angles? How can we use to calculate dip and strike? I think we've got a lot of expertise in the room for this. Let's kick it off to Wayne. I know you know this one.
Okay. Okay, well, the first thing is that you have to know where up is on your drill core. So you need oriented core. That gives you a reference about, where, to be able to even understand the direction that you're dealing with. So if you've got oriented core, and then that means that somebody's has determined let's say, the upside of the core and has drawn a line along that core, then you've got a chance. One of the challenges there, of course, is that in many cases the core is damaged and gets rotated. So if you typically would have to go back to the core and try to fit the pieces together and try and get the best idea of, that this is now robust and it's all connected correctly and not rotated. In some cases, you'll have to discard certain areas, and there's a whole system dealing with that situation when the core is in poor quality and you may only find certain areas of the core that you can connect and can be reliable. So once you've got that, where the top or the bottom of the core is, then you can basically take your a measurement of the angle of the core face, the structure that you're trying to measure, and you can also take a measurement of any lineations that you have on that face. There's good online and in books dealing with process to deal with that, and in some cases you get certain tools, both electronic and just a simple compass could be used just to measure the angles of that face. So then you need to get, once you've got those measurements, you can get a spreadsheet, you can build a spreadsheet. I think there's probably software out there as well now that it could help you just calculate the final true orientation of that fault face or the lineation. If people are interested, I mean, I have a spreadsheet. I'm sure many companies, many people have spreadsheets that allow you to do that calculation.
Yeah, very good. I don't think so. It's a very common practice. Appreciate that, Blair. Got some?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add to that and it sort of goes back to Graham's comment about the company Bible, documenting what the process is. As Wayne mentioned, whether it's a top mark or bottom mark or when it changes, what the criteria you use for measuring beta versus the system that you're using, and documenting that. And because things can change from drill company to drill company and tool to tool, having that in the log. So saying in the log for any oriented hole that you do, the bottom mark was a bottom mark, not a top mark. We measured betas clockwise looking down from the downhole end of the ellipse. All the things that go into making sure that you know how to calculate, because if you don't know those things, and I've gone to projects where you ask, was it a top mark? You have all this data and nobody knows. There's no original documentation, so it's becomes almost useless.
Very good. Getting back to the theme of consistency and communication, which has come up quite a few times.
Recommend the paper publication in SCG, Kramer et al. Have a look at it.
Great. Thank you, Wayne. Okay, it looks like we are out of time. I just want to reiterate again that this webinar is based on the Structural Geology for Geotechnical Professionals course. You can find out more about this course and all of our other courses on our website. I believe there should be some links in the chat there. Oops, sorry about that. And with that, I just want to give a big thank you to all of our panelists today and all of you who tuned in this morning. Thank you for your time. It was a really good conversation.